All right, this is Marty Wilson speaking. It's December 11th, 2022. I'm sitting in the Monroe County Historical Association with Dr. Bruce Reish, and we're here to talk about his life and apparently his grandfather's life. And the Reish name is everywhere in this county. I see it all over the place. So let's start, Bruce, by asking where and when you were born. Who were your parents?
I was born at the hospital in East Stroudsburg in 1946. I don't really know what the name of the hospital was at that time, but it's the one that's now Lehigh Valley Hospital. My father's name is Donald Yerrick, and my mother's name is Olive Catherine. She was one of the Dennises, which there's a whole bunch of those in Monroe County also. So that's where and when I was born. You said there were a lot of Reishes in Monroe County. If it is spelled the same way, the R-E-I-S-H, they are related to me because our family came, now there are R-A-I-S-H's, there's Gary Reish right over here at the funeral home and so forth, but our family came from Center County. In 1929, my grandfather moved here to work for the Kittatinny Hotel. I still remember as a kid going around that curve. Boy, I hope they get that road open before 2 months. But anyway, they going around that curve, and to the left of the road stood this big boiler stack that said Kittatinny down the side of it in white brick. Now it has since fallen down, but it was one of the many wood frame hotels in Delaware Water Gap where people came to take the air, and it had a big porch so you looked out over the river and so forth. And that's the company, the hotel that brought my grandfather in here to be their tenant farmer. Now the farm where they worked was Cope's Farm, okay, which became the Cherry Valley Golf Course, which is now, I don't know the exact name of it, but it's the nature preserve over there in Cherry Valley. That's where they lived. And the deal was that my grandfather he was to provide all the vegetables and so forth that they needed for the food at the hotel, but anything he could grow in addition to that, he was allowed to huckster around town. And so my father, Donald, was the oldest son, and he was the one who had the wagon and the horse that would go around Stroudsburg, East Stroudsburg, and sell the vegetables out of the wagon. And my mother said, yeah, what a great date. She said, you go on a ride with him and this horse, and if somebody would talk on the sidewalk, the horse would stop because he thought somebody was wanting to buy some vegetables. But there eventually ended up to be 8 children because this farmer needed lots of farm hands to grow the vegetables and stuff so he could sell the vegetables. And they were there. Well, my dad moved first. He moved out here 2 miles outside of Stroudsburg, what is now Reich's Road. When I was a kid, we just called it the back road. He bought one farm there, not quite out to Schaefer Schoolhouse. And then my grandfather's farm, he came over later and bought the farm next door, which is toward Stroudsburg from what was my dad's. And when you say Reich's Farm, everybody knew my grandfather because when he was there, he had a produce stand. And everybody would go out Deer Avenue up over Twin Hills, come down, and the produce stand was right there on your right-hand side. And it was wonderful vegetables because he had no refrigeration. Everything was picked that day. And the interesting story always is that when he was done, he had pigs down the way a little bit, and he'd take all the leftover vegetables and he'd throw them in over the fence to the pigs. And it just so happens my grandfather really did not like cucumbers. And he used that as an example because pigs will not eat cucumbers either. And he'd throw them over the fence to the pigs. He said, look, I'm not eating anything a pig doesn't want to eat. And the thing is that, cucumbers will make you burp, they'll give you gas. they give pigs gas too, and they have no way to relieve it. It just gives them a terrible stomach ache, and that's why they don't eat cucumbers.
Huh.
So that was his. My dad also was a vegetable farmer. He sold vegetables to Pocono Produce, Kinsley's, all of the grocery stores and stuff around. When I was a kid, it was my dad, my uncles, my cousins, and we would pull sweet corn, and that was the big thing in the summer. The adults they'd tuck the burlap bags under their belts. They looked like hula dancers, and they'd go into the fields, and they'd pull one of them out, and they'd count out. They pulled them by 3 at a time. They'd pull ears, put 50 in a bag. It was 52 ears of corn.
They would pick 3 ears at once?
Well, they'd pick 3 and they'd stick them in.
Oh, I got you.
Okay, they ended up with 52 in a bag, and they called them 50s of corn, and we would walk behind with the bag like this, and they'd just reach around and they'd put them in the bag. And when it was done, we'd put it over our shoulder, we'd carry it out, put it on the edge of the field, go back. They had another one started, and we'd follow them down the field. And that's how the corn got picked. And you could pick a lot of corn, because it was my dad's farm, my grandfather's farm, and then there were 2 uncles, two people who had married my dad's sisters. Elwood Fenner over in Cherry Valley, which is now Red Featherman's, the winery / Christmas tree farm.
Eagle Valley.
It was my mother's parents who then sold to Elwood Fenner, and he grew vegetables. And out in the West End, if anybody knows anything at all about Broadensville area, Ted Bush was a big produce farmer out there, had a stand right across the street from the high school, and he had refrigeration and all that stuff. And he was married to my father's other sister. So they had 4 farms that would pull sweet corn in the summertime. And you'd have a dish of cereal or something, and you'd go out and pull all this corn, and the little pickup truck was all loaded like it was going to fall all off of the truck. And then we'd go in, and my grandmother would make us breakfast, and these guys, my uncles, ate like, it's wonder they didn't weigh 300 pounds, but of course they're working, and they didn't. They'd eat a dozen eggs at breakfast. I'm like, gotta be kidding me, but it was fun, because one day they figured out, they thought they pulled maybe 10,000 ears of corn between the 4 farms by hand.
How old were you when you started doing that?
I don't know. As soon as I was big enough that I could carry the bag, and I grew early, so I was probably 12, 14.
And you're working all day long?
Well, no. You once the corn was pulled, you were pretty much done. You could maybe go pick some vegetables, beans, or something like that. But no, I didn't work all day long. The fun part of it was, once my grandfather passed away, the farm stand moved to my dad's farm, moved out the street. And I found it very funny, because sweet corn is the sweetest if it's pulled early in the morning, before it gets hot. Once the sun gets on it and the corn gets hot, the sugars in the corn turn to starch, so it's not as sweet. So we had no refrigeration. We'd just pull it. It was wet anyway from the dew and stuff, and it's in these burlap bags on that pile over there. And once the table got empty, you dump it, And once I was old enough, my dad would say, "Okay, get the truck, go out and pull 2 more bags of corn. We're running out of corn." And I'd go, and I'd see the people, they'd sit there and they'd wait for me, and they would not buy the stuff that was pulled that morning sitting over there. They'd wait till I brought the stuff in, and I picked at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when it was hot, and it wasn't going to be as sweet as the stuff that was on that table.
Oh, okay.
But that was just one of those things. So, and that's pretty much a lot of family stuff. But
Do you have siblings?
do I have a sibling? I have a sibling. My brother's name is Lawrence, My mother named me Bruce because she wanted a name that you couldn't shorten or change. So the only person in the world who ever did was my Uncle Gene. Called me Brucey. But my brother's name was Lawrence, and he hated to be called Larry. And he was a very good athlete. My brother will be the the half mile, 880 yards, half mile record holder at Stroudsburg High School forever. Because they stopped running the half mile, they run meters now. So he held the record when they changed over from yards to meters, and so about half of his track trophies say L. Reish or Lawrence Reish on them, and the other half say M. Reish or Michael Reish. He took to telling people his name was Michael, which was his middle name, and everybody knows him as Mike now. But of course he helped. He loved the farm stuff. He loved also, because my mom grew and other people too, flowers. He's a flower person. When I had a garden, and I did have a big garden when I was younger, I didn't want to grow flowers. But you couldn't eat those things, so I didn't bother with them. But he eventually became he thought he wanted to be. He had a great opportunity. He was an exchange student. Went to South America. Had the opportunity to learn Spanish before he went, and never took advantage of it. Flew to South America. Got off of the airplane. He's looking around. Finally, he sees the name on a cardboard and goes over. Well, here it turns out that the brother who had been the exchange student here who spoke English was on a trip, and nobody there spoke English. So for the first about a month that he was in South America, he was just immersed in Spanish. And Mama calls him in and puts him up on this stool, and some guy comes in and makes him a handmade wool suit, beautiful suit, which was great for me because by then he said the food in Argentina, which is where he was, it was like being in Italy. He said it was a lot of Italian type food, and he said he gained so much weight. So when he got back, he lost weight. I got a nice new suit, but he came back from there, and he thought, well, he wanted to coach football and teach biology. So he goes to Indiana, Pennsylvania, walks in, they hit him with the Krebs cycle, and he went, this isn't what I thought biology was. So he switched his major to Spanish because he repeated his senior year as an exchange student in South America. And he learned to speak Spanish there and to write and so forth. So he became a Spanish major and came back, couldn't get a job, drove bus for East Stroudsburg, went from there. Who's the guy? Lambert, they named the school after him, but he had a friend in New Jersey, helped my brother get a job in Washington, New Jersey, teaching Spanish. Lasted 2 years, I think. Believe it or not, at that time, we don't need Spanish teachers because Spanish, there's no demand for it. Yeah. Be a different story today, but they said, well, we noticed from your resume that you could, if you went pre-main and post-session at East Stroudsburg, you could teach English. So he switched over, became an English teacher over there.
Is he older than you or younger?
Younger. Okay. Of course, he retired when he was 55 because he had all of his years in teaching. And he big gardens and made bird houses and all this stuff, and it's like, I'm bored, and I could use a little more money to buy a new truck. And I used to drive bus for East Stroudsburg. I wonder if they could use anybody. So he goes in, and they said, yeah, we could always use he said, you need a substitute bus drivers. Oh yeah, we always need subs. Come back tomorrow. We'll get the papers and we'll get you lined up. He walked in the next day. They said, "Would you like a job?" So he got a job driving bus for East Stroudsburg till I think he drove for like 10 or 15 years. He's got a little retirement from that too.
So So anyway, getting back to your grandfather.
Yep.
The Kittatinny was long gone by the time you came around.
Oh, yeah.
Did he have any stories to tell about the Kittatinny?
No, he did not.
No.
Not that he told us.
All right. Well, what about your life as a young boy on the farm? What other interesting things did you do as a, or maybe you didn't think they were interesting at the time?
Not particularly. It was a nice life. You know, I helped sometimes in the morning, but a lot of times my dad wouldn't. You know, my job was to get good grades and get a good education, and he would not force me to get up and go out to the barn to help him milk. Now, by then he had switched from produce to dairy cows because he thought it would be a more even sort of income. Well, the only problem with that is that somebody has to milk them twice a day at least. And you don't get a day off because you can't say, well, I'm going to go somewhere for the weekend and I'll start milking again when I come back on Monday. That's not going to work. You got to have somebody. The only vacation my brother and I went on with my parents is we went one time. My parents took us on a vacation up to the St. Lawrence Seaway because we could get my dad's youngest brother to come over and milk cows for him for 2 days. You couldn't go anywhere. And it wasn't a real profitable thing. The between the corn and the cows, my dad also called square dances, as he was a square dance caller for a group called the Pocono Playboys, and actually he had a very good voice there at the time. Of course, now he grew up in Cherry Valley. He had an offer from Fred Waring to go with Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians to sing with the group, but he couldn't go because he was the oldest brother. He had to help take care of all the little ones, and he drove school bus. So he was a farmer. He drove a school bus, and he did square dance calling at night to make ends meet. You know, yeah, my brother and I, we helped on the farm. We helped pull corn. We would pick strawberries because when strawberries were on, it was a very interesting way they did the strawberries. There was kind of a select group of people from Stroudsburg that my father knew that he would allow to come out, and they would pick strawberries for the share. Now, if the planting was just coming on, Marty would come in that my dad knew, and he said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to pick strawberries." You would pick for the quarter share. So if you picked 4 quarts of strawberries, one of them was yours to take home. The other 3 Dad kept. And that's how he got the strawberries picked. And he had a couple ladies, a couple men that did that. Now the second time over, when the berries weren't as big and they weren't as nice and so forth, you picked for the half. You'd get 2 quarts for every 4 quarts you picked. So, you know, and we'd help as the kids. We could pick strawberries because you needed to have somebody who knew what they were doing. Because if you get a hold of a strawberry and you pull like that, the cap comes off. Well, that doesn't look very good. You can't really sell those strawberries. You got to pinch them off so that they are in the baskets and so forth and look nice. And you know, we did that. We picked that. You know, cultivating corn, plowing, harrowing, doing a lot of that stuff on the tractors. Yeah, we did that. Making hay. Oh boy, did we ever! You know, my dad had there's all kinds of hay balers. They make these big round ones that you see in the fields. Well, his baler made square bales, and they have 2 strings on them, like that you pick up. And he had an old lumber truck that he had bought from Kramer Lumber Company, and we throw these things up on the truck, stack it up, drive it up in the barn, and there was an elevator that would run it up as the barn filled. The elevator would run these bales up, and there were a couple guys up there that would take them off and stack them back in the barn. I really tried hard to be the guy who unloaded the truck, because then I could control how fast. If I was tired, I wasn't going as fast. You know, if you're up there, the bales just keep coming, and you got to get rid of them. So I always tried to be the guy who was unloading the truck. Making hay, that was a big thing in the summertime.
This is a family, you're busy all the time, it sounds like.
It's sort of, but you had lots of time off, Now the 4-lane 209 was no longer there. Was not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
That went through my grandfather's farm, through my father's farm, right up through what was honestly a swamp. I don't know, they could not have picked a worse place to put it, but it kept it from going up through Cherry Valley. Otherwise, they'd have run Route 80 right up through Cherry Valley. That's where they wanted to put it. But it came through the cut in Twin Hills and right through my grandfather down, because I said, do we do other things? Yeah, there was a big pond there where we could all go swimming and this sort of stuff. But the road came right in. They opened that quarry. J.D. Morrissey opened that quarry out there off of 33. That's where the stone all came from to fill in the swamp, fill in the pond, and build that road back there. But we had a lot of time off. We swam there. We swam over where we also farmed. My father rented the fields in what is now over by Glenbrook, the Norton Road development over there. They were all fields, and we would farm those fields. And there was really nice place over there where you could swim. You went down the bank, and there was a big flat rock that stuck out into the stream, and with an eddy below it, and we'd go over there and swim, and that sort of stuff. Remember taking my cousins over there when I was old enough to drive. We had done whatever, made hay or whatever. We were going to go swimming, and loaded them all in my car, and I drove them over, and everybody down the bank and into the creek. And I got down there, and I realized somebody the night before had parked there, was drinking beer, and they were throwing the beer bottles down on a rock and watching them break. So now I got like maybe 4 or 5 kids with me. At 16, I was as tall as I am now. I never grew after 9th grade, but I'm picking them up, putting them on the rock, and telling them to get up there to stay out of the glass. And as I'm climbing up for me to get out, my foot slipped on a rock and went back, and I put a arrowhead of glass between my toes. So I get home, and my mom looks at it. She said, you may have to go to the hospital. Why don't you go see Dr. Weber, Alberta Weber? Their home was right up the road from my dad's farm. So I get back in my car, and I drive up. Mom calls Dr. Finch and says, my son's coming up. She looks at it. Says, oh yeah, that really ought to have stitches in it. She said, no, you don't have to go to the hospital. She says, I keep him around, because she had 3 or 4 kids, quite a few. And she put me in on her living room couch, got a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and washed it out. Well, let me tell you, after that, the stitches didn't hurt a bit. But she stitched it up, and a week later I went up and she cut them and took the stitches back out. But the neighbors kind of helped out too.
Were you grooming yourself to be a farmer? Is that what you intended to do?
No, I intended to be a veterinarian. I always liked sciences. I was a good student, and I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. And a guy by the name of Dr. Gorse, I believe, he first worked out of his car. He had that little house where you turn right and go back toward Glenbrook that sits up. There's a little house up there. And then he built that animal hospital at the corner of the 4-lane and Schaefer Schoolhouse Road. And that then, my father's, the lane that went to my father's farm. Let me tell you a little bit about my father's farm while we're at this. Okay. My dad's farm, when we came out and bought it, we lived in the carriage house. The big farmhouse was there. The barn was here. And there was an older lady who lived there. Her name was Mrs. Humphreys. And she was the last of the Ransberries and the Beeseckers. And everything from her brothers and sisters had come back, furniture and stuff wise. My dad would take me over to see this lady, and she was elderly and was pretty much bedridden. She had a nurse with a cap and a starched gown, apron and stuff. But he'd lead me through these alleyways of furniture with the sheets over me. It was really, for me, it was really scary because my dad bought the farm when I was about 4, so I was younger than 4, going over to see this lady, and it turned out to be quite the sale. All of her brothers, it was not cheap furniture. This was good stuff that they sold at that sale. And that's when my dad managed to buy the farm, and we moved out of there. But originally the farm had been a seed grain showplace farm. In other words, back in the days of the steam engines and so forth, they would bring people from New York and New Jersey into Delaware Water Gap or East Stroudsburg, and they would take the surreys with the horses over, pick the people up, and bring them back out. Now, it was pretty impressive when you came in. There were they probably were 6 feet high, big round cobblestone pillars with these great big iron gates on them. The one set was still there. The other set up by the highway was fallen down, was gone. They'd bring them in, and that's what they did was to show people what was growing there, and it was pretty nice. So, and Brandon, make sure I got that right. Yeah, he painted the picture, I believe. Yes, he did. He remembered, because everything they didn't sell at the farm, at the sale when Mrs. Humphreys died, they pushed it up on the attic of the big old farmhouse. There was a big old bed up there that had feather tick mattress, and it was like interwoven pieces of canvas that the mattress was on. There was another bed that my parents had used, a beautiful brass bed that was up there, but it was like chainmail, kind of like this with a mattress on it. And there was a stack of pictures up there. I think I told you about the pictures, and I still don't know if my stepmother has them or not. But at the time, they were on the cardboardy kind of paper, and they were pictures of the horses and the surreys and the people that they would, when the farm was a showplace farm, the horses gleamed. They must have curried them for hours. The surreys were beautiful. Men all had top hats and tails on in the photos. And the ladies, now this is where we were guessing, you guys are the historical people, the ladies had ankle length dresses, they had bustles, they had bonnets that tied under here. 1900, maybe?
Maybe, but to go to a farm?
They were showing off for the people they were bringing in.
Huh.
And these were posed pictures. These weren't just snapshots. These were posed pictures.
How about that?
And Brandon knew that they were on the attic over there, and he came home from college and needed a Christmas present for me one time, and he went over and he picked one of those pictures and brought it and laid down for a week and a half on the basement floor and did a really pretty nice job, the pig picture. And I thought it was a good job, and I had it framed. I had it hanging in my office, and he was getting ready to take it back, and he said, I got to take this picture back to Pap. And I said, wait. Get on the phone, call my dad. He said, can I have that? Can I have that picture? And so I ended up with the photograph, the print, and had it framed. And I asked the lady when I framed it, I said, do I need special glass or anything? This is really old. And she said, no. She said, just don't put it where it's in direct sunlight. So So I've got the print there. The stack of pictures is maybe that high. I have no idea where the rest of them went. But there were, and Claire probably has those too. There were, on that attic, there were diaries of the old people who owned that farm. Very well written. My dad said he had read them. And my brother and I are out there playing once. There was a field there. The 4-lane goes right through that field. It's very sandy. It's when we wanted to build something, we could go out there and dig sand and mix and make concrete. It was that good of sand. And every time my father would plow that field, and people knew they'd ask when he was going to plow it, they'd come out and they'd walk that field because they'd find arrowheads and shreds of pots and things like that. We figured it probably was an Indian encampment, because down on what would now be the other side of the 4-lane, there was a really nice natural spring down there that would make so you could camp up here and be down there. And they found some wonderful arrowheads. I've seen some of them. And so my brother and I are playing in this field one day, and it's sand, and we're digging just because we're kids and we can dig. And we found a bone. Oh, we found an Indian, kept digging, and finally we come up with a horseshoe. And my dad said, yeah, well, when he read the diaries, the carriage pony had died and they buried him in the sand field. So we found this old horse. It was kind of a cute thing for us to do.
So anyway, we were talking about you wanted to become a veterinarian.
Yes. Oh. And then Dr. Gorse built that animal hospital out there. And I went out, and my idea of being a veterinarian would have been a large animal veterinarian. Pigs, cows, big dogs, not little dogs. And, he was mostly, pets. And I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do this. If I'm going to work on crazy people, let me work on the people, not their pets. So I became a dentist instead. Just one of my friends, Bob Nonamaker, when I was in school, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to go be a dentist," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that sounds like kind of neat. It's same thing as sciences and that sort of stuff." And we intended to go to Muhlenberg together, and my acceptance came through, and Bob's didn't. And he's waiting, and he had been accepted at Catawba College down in the Carolinas, and sent his money in, and the next day he got his acceptance from Muhlenberg. But he decided, well, I'll go down there anyway. So we didn't get back together again until we were both at Temple at the same time.
So you had a career as a dentist. I heard there's a what's it called? The food scrapple.
Oh, we were talking about the scrapple. Well,
how many animals did you have on the farm? I mean, you had pigs and cows.
Yeah, we had pigs and cows. When I was younger, I had horses, had riding horses. My dad, believe it or not, the guy's name was Eddie Arnold, like the singer, but he had a business out in the West End somewhere where they would take people on trail rides. And so I told my dad I wanted a horse, and he went out there and got his friend, looked at horses, and bought this old Pinto horse for me to ride. And I rode Smokey for quite a number of years. And by the way, there were 2 farms of the brothers that had my dad's farm. The other farm was what was Hill Meadow Stables on the other side of 209. That my dad's farm was originally called Broadacre, and that one was called, I don't remember anymore what Hill Meadow was called. But there were 2 brothers that had these farms back in the day. And now I forgot what I was going to tell you about it. But anyway, go back to the horse story. My dad got me this horse, and but Hill Meadow was a riding stable. That's what it was. they did gymkana's kind of things where it was Western riding. It wasn't English riding. It was Western riding. There were shows. You showed your horses and you did crazy stuff. You ran barrel races and that sort of stuff. And I wanted to have another horse that was a little bit faster than Smokey, so he went back to Eddie and got another younger, fierier horse for me to ride. And we rode all over because a lot of the roads weren't paved. Where it's now Bill Reinhardt's Jeep place, okay? That was always a Chrysler dealer, but it wasn't Elmer. It was another guy, and Paul Warner was the kid's name. He had a horse, and so Paul and I got together and we rode horses. Gary Chrisman, they had horses. They lived down there on 209, across from, I don't know what it's called now. It was Banner Meadow, but down there at the bottom of the hill, they had horses. And my friend Austin Kaiser, lives out where Louis Paulette's farm is now. That was Kaiser's farm. They had horses. So we got together and we would ride all over the Poconos. And there was an older guy who worked for Sanofi. Well, it was Pasteur back then, but Dr. Schmee, I think his name was. He was a veterinarian for them, and he rode, and he kept all of that woods on the other side of Glenbrook. All the old woods roads and stuff, he rode with a pair of nippers. He kept all those roads opened up in there. And that's kind of neat up there too. There is a reservoir up there, a walled-in dam, which of course is broken now and so forth. But there was the water for was it Broadhead Estate, Stroud Estate, where Glenbrook is. It's provided their water that we, of course we had to find out when we were riding and so forth. So we kind of rode our horses all over the place.
This would have been the 50s, 60s?
Would have been we were in high school. Yeah, it would have been late 50s, early 60s. That I remember Paul, his called a horse that's tough mouthed. You pull back and they just put their head up and just go. And it was dirt road, and we were kind of racing up Schaefer Schoolhouse Road. Now the church that's there wasn't where the church is now. The church used to be out near the road, so you really couldn't see anything. And she took him out across that road if there'd have been a car coming, and he went up and around the corner to where PVP is before we caught up with him. He was really upset, but we had some adventures. I remember, I had two horses, so people would ride with us, and we're running out through what was my grandfather Orion's meadow one day, and we're kind of racing, and we looked over and here the cinch is flapping below the horse. The saddle's untied. And we're like, oh. So we tried to slow down really good without telling Bobby Warner was Paul's cousin, and telling him what was going on so we didn't scare him, and luckily for us, we got him stopped. We were pretty lucky that day. But yes, we rode all over the place.
So you were telling me about making scrapple.
Okay, yeah. There were times that I did not like what was going on. We did our own butchering, which works out fine for now, because now when I hunt, I can do my own butchering. But I hated doing chickens, butchering. Many chickens, not like two. They would all, my grandfather and my uncles, everybody get together, and they'd chickens. You're gonna do a couple dozen chickens. and you gotta kill them. You gotta dunk them in the hot water. You gotta peck them. You gotta pull their feathers off of them. You gotta clean them. And chickens stink. It was awful. Hated doing that. But the beef wasn't. Fortunately, we had this thing on the back of the tractor that was there to lift things up. So a beef, they could hold a whole cow up and skin it and cut it in half, and then it mostly just hung for a while to cure the meat, and then my dad would take it and he'd start butchering it up, and he had a bandsaw, he had a grinder, and they could actually butcher. But I loved butchering pigs. I thought that was the greatest thing. First of all, my dad and my grandfather were the only two people I could see that knew how to do it, but they had a big bathtub. And when they would kill the pigs, they would put them in the bathtub in scalding water. I wish I had thought to bring the picture of this of our farm, but on what was my dad's farm, there is still the original settlers' cabin fireplace is still there. It's stone laid up with clay. It's not mortared, and had big kettle hooks in it, and there was just a shed built around it that we used for wood and butchering. And this is where we did the butchering. And so they'd boil the water, they'd take it, they'd pour it in this tub, and they could dunk the pig, and they had these things, they were scrapers. They were a wooden handle with like an upside down saucer in metal. And Dad and Grandpa, so when a lot of people will skin pigs, but they would shave the hair all off of it. So when you did it, and it was just easier to do. So, but then you'd start making pieces out of the butchering, and of course they did the hams and they did the bacon, and but as you did these, and they did roasts and so forth, but as they did these things, there were pieces of meat that didn't quite, you trim that off, okay? And if it was nice, there was a big long table over there. That was going to be the sausage, okay? And it's always lots of fun to listen to my grandfather and my grandmother arguing about how much pepper and salt and so forth you put on it, and this stuff on the sausage. And the kettles were going over here. So as you butchered, the pieces of fat with the skin on them along the outside, they all went in one kettle. And the fat melted and rendered, and this became lard. In the other kettle, there was water. And in there, any little pieces of whatever, just meat and stuff, went in there. And as the day goes on, you get hungry, you start fishing around in here. You can find pieces of meat that you put a little salt on them and eat them. And I love doing that stuff. And then what they did with these two kettles is, at the end, of course, they had these big bread pans, and they would pour lard in them. Actually, they didn't pour it in them, I'm sorry. We had this thing, it was about so big around, about so high, and it was a sausage press. Had the little tube that came out the bottom that you could put the sausage casings on. And, when they did the sausage, they'd grind this down, and it would come out through, and they'd make rings of sausage. You used the same thing to do lard. You'd get into the lard kettle, and you'd put the fat and the stuff, and it would run out this end, and you'd fill these pans with the lard, and then they would crank this down, and they'd go back up, and they'd put more in, they'd crank it down and get the fat out of these chunks of fat with the skin on them. And these things were called cracklings then. You had cakes of cracklings. And you would eat them, tell this to my Uncle Gary, you eat them like you eat an artichoke. You'd bite them and pull what had been the fat off of the skin. And it's really very, very good. It's probably not good for you, but it's really good. And of course, my Uncle Gary can't help but chew on the skin. I can't tell you how many broken teeth I fixed for that guy, because he's chewing on the hard cracklings. And then the other kettle, and they did the other kettle before they took the lard all off. They do the other kettle. We take that. Actually, we carried it out to my dad's milk house where we had clean place to do it. And you would take cheesecloth and you would pour all of that juice that you've been cooking all day with the meat and stuff in it through the cheesecloth, and now you got all of the bone and the little hunks of meat and that sort of stuff, and you got all this broth. Well, you put the broth back in the kettle. You wait till it cools off a little bit, and then you go through the meat, and you take all the little pieces of bone and any gristle or anything like that out, and you put the meat back in the kettle. So now you got all this rich broth and a little bit of meat, and they take it back and they put it on the fire. And the biggest problem they're making scrapple is what they were doing. And the biggest problem to making scrapple, even back in those days, was you couldn't find buckwheat flour to make scrapple with. You couldn't buy it. Some years you had to plan ahead to go get it. Canfields usually had it, but you could get. So there's salt and pepper, there's seasonings that go with it, and the buckwheat flour, and you'd put that in there. And they had this thing. It looked like a hoe. It was about this, like a long hoe on this great big long pole, and then they'd stir this buckwheat flour into the broth and the seasonings, and it would go and go and go until it would roll away from the kettle. It wouldn't stick to the sides of the kettle. If it kept sticking, then they went over to the other kettle and they got a ladle of lard and they put it in there, add a little more grease till it would roll back away when they did it. And then they'd scoop that out and they'd fill these pans with the scrapple, and as it set, the fat would come up and form a seal on the top. The way, like you see, my mother never canned jelly. She always used paraffin on top of it. Well, this is like same sort of deal, except it was a layer of lard fat about that thick. And they just kept these things in the door, but there were two doors on the back of the house, so in between there where it was cold, they would keep the scrapple. And so I loved doing pigs. It was a day-long process where everybody was talking and doing this and that and the other thing, and that butchering I really enjoyed.
Did you ever sell the meat? Did you sell the meat, or
No.
was that just for your own?
As for us, my dad would never do veal. Point being, he really didn't like veal, And he'd go, well, look how little that is. Look, in 2 years he'll look like that, So we never had veal. He didn't want to do it.
How many acres were the farms?
They were both about 100 acres, my dad's and my grandfather's. When they sold what they called the Houston farm, which wasn't much of a farm, it had all grown up even back then, had grown up in woods and so forth. The Houston farm is the one that, if you go out Reish Road on the corner where you turn on to Schaefer Schoolhouse, it's got the two lions there. Okay, that was the Houston farm. And that was sold, probably, I was still in high school when they sold that. My dad bought 7 more acres there, and off of that farm. Actually, what he bought was the old sugar berm of that farm. There were some sugar maple trees out there that were like that, and so he had 107 acres then. And then when the highway come through and cut my grandfather's farm and my dad's farm off from parts of their farm, my grandfather sold, I don't know who he sold it to, but it eventually became houses. And my dad, Howard Leininger, owned Hill Meadow Stables. He was cut off from 7 acres on this side. So for a while, we just mowed the grass on the other side and chased the cows. There was a stream there, and it's what they call a box. It was big enough you could drive the tractor with the mower on the back of it through the box, drop the sickle bar mower down and keep the meadow mowed over there, and we'd chase the cows through so they graze over there. But eventually it became a pain in the neck. So what they did a land swap. He got Howard's 7 acres. Howard got his 7 acres, and that was the land then that. And when I was way back in the story there was talking about the pillars and so forth. They ran from my dad's farm right straight up to the 2-lane 209. And I guess there was originally a double set of pillars on the top because there had been 2 roads up there. But anyway, our road after the 4-lane went through went this way and then out to Schaefer's schoolhouse, because you had to get out somehow. So that ran right along the side of that piece that he got from Howard Leininger.
How did Route 33 happen? Was there a story there, or did they have to fight your family to get the land?
They don't fight you. They just came in and took 2-point-something acres of my land. They just come and tell you, you can fight them, and you're probably going to spend more in lawyers' fees than you'll increase the price. But they're going to take the land. The eminent domain will take the land. You can accept what they pay you for it, or you can fight them and see if you can get more money for it. But they're going to take the land. Because when my father passed away, he had bought a front-end loader backhoe, not nice big one, and there's a place out there that's called Rockdale Estates. Well, he had RKR Hess lay it out, and he built the roads himself, did all the grading, dug the ditches for the underground, because in that development, all of the utilities are underground. That farm then made him a very nice retirement during doing that. And so I lost my train of thought again about what were we talking about?
We're talking about the land 33, how they took the land.
Okay, yeah, they just went. It never made any sense to us that they would put it right through that swamp, but they did. And no, they just come in and they take it. And here, this year, don't ask me what they're going to do with it, because I asked them, and these guys, what the PennDOT people told me is, well, we're going to take this like a 30-foot section of your property right down along the 4-lane 209. We need more land. We're going to take it, and we offer you this much and this much. And I went, okay. So I called Bill Kramer. Why not? And so he says, well, get a hold of these guys. So I get a hold of Mr. Bates, who's an appraiser. And basically what I found out is that what they were offering to pay me was about right. One, there's 2 sections there of land. There's one that at one time been permitted and approved for a building lot. There's another one that was never really subdivided. And so they made 2 different offers. And I don't remember at this point which one was which, but one of the offers, when Bill Kramer told me Mr. Bates was a great appraiser, so I believe him. He said, well, they're underpaying you on this less than what I would have appraised it, but then they overpaid you on this one, so it's pretty much a wash. Take what they're offering you. You can't go to court and fight them and win and get more money, which would have been the option. I could have tried something like that if I was trying to get more money. The aggravation and the lawyer's costs and stuff would have probably eaten up everything I'd have got. Maybe wouldn't have got any more than I did, from what Bates told me. And Bill said he does a lot of appraisals. He does big appraisals. He doesn't do little stuff like this a lot. So No, there's no way you could have stopped them from putting that 4-lane in there. Although the people in Cherry Valley were very good. They stopped them from putting it in there. Originally, that 209 extension that goes out to 33 was not going to be where it is. The original plan was to come from Delaware Water Gap right up through Cherry Valley and ruin that beautiful valley. Come out somewhere out near Bossersville. The truth is that made more sense. That was a straight shot right out through there. It would have ruined that valley. And the people over there got together, the whole community got together and fought that, and it did not go through.
You must have seen a lot of change in Monroe County over your years.
Oh yeah.
And what are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
A lot more people, a lot more cars, way more housing. And unfortunately, I see the same thing happening here that I see happened because I went to dental school at Temple. So I saw a little bit of Bucks County. I went to Muhlenberg and the Lehigh Valley. The thing that bothers me the most about all this development, and it may come probably not in our lifetime, but maybe in yours, it may come back to bite you, is that all these housing developments that have gone into the Poconos, all of this warehousing and stuff that has gone in down in the Lehigh Valley, especially in the Lehigh Valley and Bucks County. The farmland in the Poconos it's nice farmland, but it's not the Lehigh Valley. It's not Bucks County. That farmland down there was some of the best farmland in the nation, and it's now under blacktop and concrete. And it may come back to bite you I don't think you could get it back even if you dug it all up. I don't think it would be as good a land to grow food on. And you may come a time when you're going to need that for food. So, but yeah, as far as what I saw, diversity in this area, yeah, you got a lot of diversity that there wasn't any when I was a kid. We had 2 Jewish boys in my class, Charlie Kahn and Johnny Blaker. There were 2 girls that were Jewish. There was 1 black male. Tommy Rosemond was our class president. His father had been the chef at the Beaver House. And he ended up being a federal judge out like in Chicago or somewhere. And there were 2 black girls. And that was it as far as diversity. I don't think there was a single person in our class that spoke Spanish. None. 0. So, yeah, there's a lot of differences. And, it was this, there was a lot more trust back then.
How do you mean that?
Okay, the guy who has a house next to mine, he came in there and he said to my father, I'd like to buy this land, but I can't really pay you till I sell my house up in Lake Valhalla. And my dad said, okay, it's yours. I'll give you till whenever to get your money together. And there was nothing written. They were just trusting each other to do things like that. And I can't tell you how many times my neighbors told me that story. He still can't believe it. But it's just, there's a lot of things where now everything has got to be written down, and if you don't write it down, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter. It's all the little things in these contracts that bug people. We're still trying to settle with PennDOT. Last thing was that Bill drugged me into his office yesterday or the day before. He says, you got to sign these papers before. And I'm looking at him going, I think I signed these already. He says, well, they lost them. They did something with them. Sign them again. And what they were is they were the disbursements for the attorney and the appraiser. So, and nobody trusts you.
So is this for the widening project of 80? So they're taking,
No, it's not 80. This is 209.
so 4 lane 209, they're widening that.
They're gonna what they want, from what I hear, is they want to close Schaefer Schoolhouse Crossing, kind of like they did, but even more so than what they did out at Beaver Valley. I said, all they're going to do is put their problem in a different place. They're going to need a stoplight next to what's the ice cream place? Come on, Big Star. They're going to need a stoplight at Big Star because that's where everybody's going to go to get across. You go to, when I used to work, I'd go that way to go to work, so I didn't have to deal with a stoplight out there, and the traffic was just getting worse and worse down there. And they closed off Schaefer Schoolhouse. That traffic is just going to go nuts down there.
So you raised your family on the Reish farm, is that correct or not?
Yes. When I left school I lived here all my life, but I lived at Muhlenberg. I didn't commute to Muhlenberg. Went to Temple. Another famous story. I was so non-political when I was in high school. Now, I graduated in 1964, so I was right in the middle of Vietnam. I forgot to register. It was not a protest. I flat forgot to register. So my friend Alan Bond, my birthday's in March. My friend Alan Bond, I think it was October, it's his birthday, and he says, oh man, it's my birthday tomorrow, I gotta go register. And I'm like, oh shit. So the two of us went down to the I think it was upstairs in the post office at the time. There was the draft board's office. Her name was Beulah McConnell. And I went in there and I said, my name is Bruce Reish, and I apologize. I forgot to register for the draft. My birthday was March 4th. I'll bet you she yelled at me for 3 to 5 minutes, just screaming at me. She was so excited when Alan came in, whose birthday was the day before, she yelled at him for 3 minutes. But I didn't realize it was my name that triggered her. Of my grandfather's 8 children, 5 of them were boys. And my grandmother and Beulah McConnell had a war going because she tried to draft all 5 of them, but my father couldn't pass the physical. He had had rheumatic fever as a kid and was told that if you don't stop farming by the time you're 21, you're going to be dead. Your heart is so bad, blah, blah, blah. So, and he could not pass the physical for the Army. And, but, my grandmother and Beulah were.
So she had another opportunity to stick it to the Reish.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons I went directly into the Army out of dental school. Because there is such a thing as a professional draft. They can come and lift you out of your practice. And I figured, well, if Monroe County ever comes up, I'm the guy, And so I've tried to volunteer for the Navy because I heard the Navy had the nicest bases. They were full. I said, well, why did you guys come to the dental school then? But I tried the same thing with the Army, or not the Army, the Air Force. They were full. So, okay, well, if I get drafted, I'm leaving the Army anyway. So, beginning of sophomore year, the Army's back. They're looking to sign you up. And I thought, well, okay, if you sign up, we will give you your choice of base. Great. I wanted First Army. I wanted Northeastern United States. I wanted to be able to work at setting up a practice. And I said, okay. So they said, all right, sign me up. Sent me to beautiful Fort Monmouth in Red Bank, New Jersey. Nice place, really is. And what they didn't tell you is they don't promise you'll stay there the whole time. I did. Several of my friends who went with us didn't. They ended up in Korea or Thailand or somewhere like that. But I got to stay, and I still didn't have anything. I still wasn't ready to go out and go into practice, because at that time, then I graduated from dental school in 72. Vietnam's winding down, and they're having a RIF, a reduction in force. So what they do is they say, well, you have a 24-month obligation. 23 months and a day is as good as that, and it kept backing up. I think we were down to 21 months and a day or something like that, and I just flat wasn't ready. I didn't have anything to do. So when they out-processed us, they said, oh, let's go back don't do it here, go back to your hometown, go to the unemployment office and tell them you're a returning veteran and that you want to go on unemployment. So I did. Went down here, and they were very, very nice to me. I was a returning veteran, and they went through the whole list. The lady says, last question was, do you hold any occupational or professional licenses in the state of Pennsylvania? I said, yes, I'm a dentist. She says, you can't collect unemployment. I said, well, they told me I could. I worked for Uncle Sam for the last 2 years. Oh, and I see her back there with another lady, and this book must have been about this big, and they're going like, she comes back, she says, you're right, you can collect unemployment. I said, well, yeah, I wasn't practicing dentistry out in the world, I was working for Uncle Sam. And so I ended up collecting unemployment for 2 weeks, and of course your paycheck is 2 weeks behind, so by the time I talked to Bill Vicknicki, who was the orthodontist here, he helped me find a job in Pocono Pines. I talked to the dental company, and they wanted to get an in with you so they could set you up in practice, and they got me a job in Wilkes-Barre. So I'd drive to Wilkes-Barre in the morning, work the morning there, turn around, drive up the hill, grab a hamburger on the way down, go down to Pocono Pines and work all afternoon and evening in Pocono Pines. So, and kept that up until I finally found a piece of property up there on 611, and my office was, there was an old farm there that along 611 they went every 100 yards, they made a lot. Well, when they wanted to get back behind it, they took 40 off of mine. No, there was 100 feet, not yards. 100 feet. They took 40 feet off of my lot. So this piece of property was long and narrow. So I had to go, what a lot of fun that is too, to go sit at all of the township meetings at night. I don't know how those lawyers do it. Bill Kramer does it. I think he still does it. He did it for years. And, I went through all of the process of getting permission to put my office on that piece of property. And that's how I ended up where I was. It turned out great. I had parking. When I was first there, traffic on 611 wasn't bad at all. It was super. But, now it's like, come out of there and you have to sit there going, I really do need to go down to the bank today. Got to turn left. So.
And you did dental work in the Army, right?
Yes, I was a dentist in the Army.
Because you were telling me about some of those really quality fillings and stuff you were. It's one of these things like you could have filmed it and made an episode of MASH out of it. But, again, talking about diversity and that sort of stuff, we had one little guy, and when I say little, he was this much shorter than I am, chubby, and he was Jewish. And all Mel ever really wanted to be is he wanted to own a Mercedes dealership. And speaking of which, he had a Porsche that he worked on. A little, what's the really tiny one? 9?
Not 914.
Yeah, something like that. The rear engine thing.
Yeah, 914.
Yeah, he had one of those, and he loved this car. That's all he wanted to do. And
he had one of these old Army sergeants come in, and he knew that Mel, I don't remember what his last name was, but he knew that Mel was Jewish, and he would tell him the worst, awful anti-Semitic jokes the whole time. And Mel just kept his mouth shut, did nothing, and went through the whole thing. Last thing he had to do for this guy was this great big filling on his back tooth. And he sit there and he filled it full of silver, and he very carefully carved a 6-pointed star on the fighting surface of this guy's tooth. The problem was Mel didn't get out of the Army soon enough. He was a year ahead of me. The guy comes back in for a checkup. Believe it or not, he comes back for a 6-month check. Comes in, and the dentist who's doing his exam goes, "That's really interesting." What do you mean it's really interesting? That star on your tooth. The guy went ballistic. He went up screaming, jumping up and down at the colonel, and the colonel calms them all down. So we had the best time with it, but it's,
You said they weren't like quality fillings. You send people off to Vietnam, right? Didn't you?
Oh, the thing with the IRM, the intermediate restorative material,
Yes.
which is a great thing in dentistry today. It's what you, if you think about what your dentist office smelled like when you were a kid, smelled like clove oil. You could have taken me into Dr. Harlacker's office over in East Stroudsburg, blindfolded it in a sack, and dumped me out on the floor, and I'd have known where I was, because the whole office smelled like eugenol, smelled like clove oil. And that's what dentists always used as a sedative medicated filling, was zinc oxide and eugenol. Mix it up, squish it in there, smooth it down. And the clove oil really did help to calm down teeth that were hurting, excited. And so the Army took and they added a reinforcing filler to this mixture. So when you were drafted and you got to California and they're going to send you on to Vietnam, if you had needed a filling, this is what they did. They took the decay out. The guy's got this stuff, and he squishes it in his thumb, smooths it out, and as soon as it gets wet, it starts to set up, and that was your filling. It was supposed to last for a year. You were supposed to be back in a year. Well, it lasted usually for about 6 months. But and if you had a bad tooth, they simply pulled it. If you had something that was going to possibly would give you a toothache in the next year, they extracted your tooth. Even if it could have been saved, they just extracted it. So they had so many guys going to Vietnam.
So if you're a GI in Vietnam, that's after 6 months and this thing falls out, what do? You live with it for 6 more months till you get out of there?
Most of them, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty much. That'd be the least of your problems, probably.
Yeah, well, of course.
But and it's still something that is used a lot in dentistry today. Because it's easy to do if you got an emergency, and it calms the tooth down, and you just have to hope they come back.
Well, you've lived a fascinating life. You've done a lot of interesting things.
Well, we did a lot of really interesting things around here.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, the Wesleyan Church, up where they've got the things, they're on the news all the time now with the cold shelter and so forth. Reverend Drury was the minister up there, and his son Keith was a year ahead of me. Keith comes to me one day and he says, "How'd you like to go rock climbing in the water gap?" I said, "You're kidding." "Nope. I read I got all the, he's got the nylon ropes, he's got the pitons and the carabiners and the whole thing. We're going to go rock climbing." And I tell you, we did. We went on the Jersey side. We went up over all those broken rocks. We got in there and we had kind of looked at it with the things and decided where we were going to go. And we did it not once. We did it several times. There's one place there you can see it when you look through the binoculars on the other side. It's flat, but it's got this crack this way. And we went out across there to get to the next place where we could go up. And then you get up, because the cool thing is you get to the top and you tie the rope off and you can rappel back down, which was the really sharp thing to do. Reverend Drury looked like what you would think of as your typical minister. Very straight, very long white hair, all combed back, looked very neat. And he's over on the Pennsylvania side watching us go one day. And this tourist stops and is looking through the thing, and he says, "What parent would let their kids do something like that?" And Reverend Drury looks at him and goes, "You see the one in the blue windbreaker? He's mine." So yeah, we did some interesting stuff. You know, we took a same group of guys, decided we were going to go camping. It wasn't around here. Oh no, Keith finds this place called Moosehead Lake in Maine. We had no idea what we were doing, where we were going. Oh, we're gonna sleep under our canoes. Now we all had sleeping bags and stuff like that. We were not prepared at all. We got up there, we got on this thing, and it was absolutely beautiful. And the little black no-see-ums were just biting the heck out of us. And so the one day we're heading up this river on the end of the lake. All of a sudden, down the river comes this powerboat. Big lights on, boom, you know, about washed us up on the shore. Guy throws the brakes on and stops. So we go down to him and he says, "What do you guys think you're doing?" So we were just, you know, we got a little further away from our camp than he says, "I run a fishing camp on this lake." He says, you guys don't know what you're doing. So he took us back to his fishing camp and said, "Here, go sleep over there in this cottage." And you know, he didn't have any clients at the time, and got us up the next morning, made us a really nice breakfast, which we really enjoyed, and you know, stuff. But you know, we did stuff like that around here. That and the riding the horses and that sort of stuff. That's what we kind of did as kids.
Pretty interesting stuff. Are there any questions we should have asked you about, or any stories that you think would be good for listeners to hear?
Not that I can think of, really.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, I didn't. It's not like I thought I lived a real exciting life. I just, you know.
Well, you did some things most people have not done.
No, I don't really know.
Okay. All right. Well, then maybe we'll call it a day.
That's good. That's fine.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you for inviting me.